It's your fairy godmother, Mint. Just kidding, but not really. Today we're going to talk about one of my favorite subjects. As always, they're always my favorite subjects. This one I think about so often, and it is fairy food. Of course, we've all heard tons and tons of legends about fairy food. Not to eat it, not to go near it, not to drink the wine, anything like that, because if you do eat it, you'll be trapped in the world of fairy forever, leaving yourself dead to the human world and spirited away to this realm where you will just become a fairy slave forever. And in a lot of legends, that is absolutely the case. We've heard tons of stories of that happening. One of my favorite sort of tales that has to do with fairy stealing is actually Hansel and Gretel. It is where, you know, it's always a stepmom in these stories, where she's like, we're broke, we're poor, we don't have enough money to feed all of these kids. So she literally like sends them out into the woods to go pick some berries or dig up roots or whatever, depending on which story you're reading. And they get lost. And, you know, after finding their way back and then getting lost again, they find the gingerbread house in which they are starving. They, of course, eat some, trapped by the witch. You know the rest of the tale. That is a classic, like, fairy stealing story where there are children that are lost, and this witch or fairy sees this opportunity to steal some children, keep the daughter as a slave, and the son to eat over the cold winter months. I'm telling you now, almost every single fairy tale that you have heard, replace the villain with a fairy and the story is the same. Because those are very classic tales that, you know, the characters are changed, they're like finagled, they're moved around, depending on what you're trying to scare your child with. If you're trying to tell your child not to wander into the woods, then it's like a scary, monstrous old lady, you know. You're not gonna say it's a beautiful and enchanting fairy, because then they're gonna be excited and they're gonna go wandering off into the woods. But even though there is that classic tale, which is scary and that shows you that there are some terrifying things out there into the woods that are trying to get you and keep you and take you, there are also so many stories of children wandering off into the woods or getting lost in the woods, and instead of them encountering something scary that makes them run for their life and have to push an old lady in an oven, they end up encountering someone beautiful, someone soft and gentle, and someone who has witnessed them in their living situation that may not be as pleasant as it could be for a child, and instead of wanting to enslave them or take them against their will, they offer them a chance to live in the Fae realm. Now, of course, it's not presented as the Fae realm, but the offering usually comes with food. So picture this. You're a sick, old Victorian child, and you're small, and your name is Timmy, and maybe you have a cane because you hobble when you walk, and you've had a bowl of water-thin porridge for breakfast, and you're sad, and you're wandering off on, you're leaving the trail because you're so tired and hungry, and your daddy has smacked you across the cheek this morning because instead of polishing his shoes with a cloth, you polished it with his tie, and now you have a welt on your face and you're exhausted and hungry. You're in the forest, and you sit down by a tree only to rest your weary Victorian child head. Close your eyes just for a moment to imagine a sausage that you might eat to sustain yourself. And when you open your eyes, there is a lovely sound of twinkling bells off in the distance. Beautiful twinkling bells, the most beautiful bells you've ever heard. So beautiful that it can almost be a lovely woman's voice. So you stand up because you found some sort of hopeful strength. You follow this sound deeper and deeper into the woods, and you come upon a clearing. It's as if the trees have all moved aside so that you could find this clearing. And in this clearing, there are gorgeous wildflowers of every color blooming all around you. It's the most beautiful sight you've ever seen. In the middle of this clearing is a long banquet table covered with every pastry that you can imagine, beautiful treats and wonderful flavors and colors and smells, and it just looks so good. And you are a sickly, dying Victorian child. So of course, you're going to inch up to that table, look around your body to see who's out here, and you're going to decide to take a little bit off the table to eat. On one hand, in a scary fairy story, you eat the food, it turns to maggots in your mouth, which is a tale I've heard so many times. Fairy food is always depicted as being beautiful, delicious, smells wonderful, it's decadent, it's something you've never seen before. Very often pastries, very often something that you don't always get, something that you would want to indulge yourself with, something that looks so delicious that just makes your mouth water. And when you taste it, sometimes it turns to like maggots in your mouth because it's not real food. Or if you're someone who's wicked, you're being punished by being, very selfish and greedy and taking food that's not supposed to be yours. And as it turns to maggots in your mouth, then the fairies reveal themselves around you, laughing at you and taking you by your eye sockets like this and dragging you off into the fairy realm. On the other hand, before you decide to take a bit of food, you use your adorable Victorian child manners and you think, you know what, I'm starving, but I'm not going to steal. And the fairy then appears to you as a beautiful, sweet, motherly woman who wants to nurture you and take care of you, realizes that you've been smacked across the face by your dad this morning and that you're starving and you're not being treated well, and decides to give you this offering of a land in which you will be fed, never hungry, never tired, never ill, and where you'll be completely healthy and happy. So there is a very clear divide between these two types of experiences with fairy food, and they're both spoken about dozens of times across many cultures. Sometimes people are punished for stealing the food, sometimes people are rewarded. So usually when it comes to this reward, it is in this instance you're a sickly Victorian child and this motherly fairy wants to take care of you. There are definitely creatures in the Fae realm that see children as being very beautiful and innocent and wonderful, and that they should be saved, they should be taken care of, they should be treated really, very well, because they have imaginations and they have pure love in their hearts, and that's something that hasn't been sullied yet, it hasn't been tarnished yet, and that kind of purity and that kind of imagination holds a great deal of power. And we're going to, talk about another example of this in the Neverending Story, where Bastian is able to create the world of Fantasia all over again just because of his purity, his creativity, his imagination, and his belief in magic. He can create this beautiful world out of all of the amazing adventures that he's taken by reading tons and tons of books. So think of a fairy seeing a child in that light, something that is a creator of worlds. Would you want to, punish a creator of worlds, someone who could create and believe and dream up any kind of magical food and tool and house and appearance, anything that you can imagine a child can create? So you would want to save them, you want to nourish them, you want to take them in and make them love you, hoping that this love will enable you to create a relationship where this child will create these things for you. So that is another incentive for a fairy to want to take a child. So they offer you a bit of food. If you take the food, you are saying yes. And this fairy would then take the child into this, beautiful clearing of gorgeousness and light, and they would walk through together, and that child would be taken care of forever in the fairy realm. They would never grow up, they would remain a child forever, and they would have everything they ever wanted. In return, they would be creating things and sharing stories and being just basically like a creative imagination machine for the Fae. And that's something that in a lot of stories, after the child is taken, their body, their human form is left behind, and they are no longer alive, but their spirit has gone to the fairy realm and is living in bliss and having just the time of their childhood, their life as a child forever. Another thing that can happen in this scenario is that the child decides not to take the food, and this is another thing that comes up a lot. When you decide not to take the food that's being offered to you, one side, scary fairy tale, you are then punished. You're treated badly. You are thrown away because you've just taken a beautiful gift and, you know, poo-pooed it. So then you are treacherous and horrible, and then you are punished even further by maybe losing a limb, losing an eyeball, losing whatever, because A, you've seen the fairies, and so your eyeballs have to be plucked out, and B, you have returned a gift that someone very magical is offering you. And so they say, okay, well, you deserve to be punched in the face. So then they punish you, send you back to your world, and your life is even worse than that. Or if you know, in another scenario, you decline politely, you know, or maybe you take the gift, don't eat it right away, put it in your pocket, and, you know, show your gratitude and your reverence of this creature, and then slowly back away and then walk back into the forest. Sometimes you'll be blessed with gifts, with luck, with good fortune after that, because you did not, you know, just completely turn away a really specific gift from a very specific creature. You have shown that you have respect and that you did take the gift and you understand what you're being given. So you're, like I said, you're given some beautiful things after that. Or you're just left alone and you're okay and you've dodged a bullet, because other stories tell a different tale of taking and or eating fairy food. The second instance also gets a lot of play in the fairy tale circuit, because there are a lot of stories where children come upon this banquet and it is not left alone. You know, there are people dancing around it. They look just like humans, but they're just extremely beautiful, you know, lovely women and men and like children, and they're all having a wonderful time, and you can tell that the children are human children, but there's something a little bit off, a little bit different about the adults, and they are beautiful and sweet and kind, but they're just a little bit sparkly, a little bit weird. The children look incredibly happy, and you're like, ooh, I would love to join this party. I'd love to come in here and like hang out and play with these kids that are obviously very happy and they've been eating all this food and they're having a good time. But then you notice something a little bit off about the children. So this is something that's going to segue into our other topic, is the fairy drunkenness that happens with some instances of eating fairy food. So some children who perhaps are a little bit greedy, a little bit selfish, a little bit, you know, not on the most, on their best behaved child life, eat the fairy food, and then they become sort of child slaves of the fairies. And instead of doing any kind of work or service for the fairies, they basically just entertain them by being happy, joyous, and dancing all of the time. Basically, a never-ending party. Of course, that sounds wonderful to allow children a never-ending party. Ooh, this reminds me of Pinocchio immediately. So, you know, the same thing happens to Pinocchio, which is another reference to the fairies taking you, where Pinocchio turns into a donkey because he's indulging in this lifestyle that is not, you know, it's against his father's wishes, it's against the wishes of adults in general, and so he knows that by going off into, what was it called? It was like a boys' wonderland or whatever, where they're all just like smoking and drinking and eating candy and gambling and stuff. Oh my gosh, that was nuts. And then they turn into donkeys, literal donkeys, and they take the donkeys off and sell them, and that's it. Like, how horrible is that? Totally a fairy reference, though. It's 100% a reference to fairy culture, because if you are, like I said, one of those children that's like a little bit naughty, and you get into the situation where you're dancing and you're having a good time and you go ahead and eat some of that fairy food, you are stuck dancing and partying forever. So when you are this other child coming up on this party, seeing this, looks great or whatever, before you take a bite of that fairy hot dog or whatever, you look at one of the children and you can see they have bags under their eyes, like $50,000 bags. Like, they've been partying for 15 years, this child, who looks like it's 6 years old and is actually like 35, and has been kept a child forever, and forced to perform childlike acts childlike acts of like just dancing and being frivolous and having a good time, eating nothing but cake and ice cream and just like the most indulgent sweets their entire existence. And you notice that up close their feet look like a little bit like they're falling off, you know, their eyes are, like I said, black and blue, bags for a days, like fingers are wrinkled, like they look a little stinky. And once you notice these sorts of things, that's when the glamour wears off. So this is when, you know, the fairy is glamoring all of these things, so it looks like the most amazing kind of farty party, and then you recognize, you see a little bit of that glamour slip, and you can see that no one is really having a good time. You know what I mean? It looks like it from the surface, but you see they're really not having a good time. And when that glamour slips, it often slips off of the food as well. And you can see, A, the food is not food. It's just like old, gross, like moldy, maggot-covered, yucky bread. Or B, it's nothing but leaves and twigs and stuff like that. Or C, nothing was there at all. This is all completely an illusion. And you can see that the children are actually like 35, 40, 50-year-old adults who have been trapped in this state for tons and tons of years, being forced to party forever. And this is, of course, one of those types of stories that people would tell their children to keep them from A, wandering in the woods, B, taking food or candy from strangers, but C, also, it shows that there is a very interesting kind of relationship between creatures of different realms. Sometimes they are beneficial relationships where, like I said, the woman comes and she rescues the child from a life of destitution and from being beaten and treated poorly by the world and by their parents, and gives them a home where they don't have to necessarily dance for the rest of existence, but they can at least be happy and fulfilled and taken care of and nurtured in a very particular way. And then there's also the relationship where these other creatures feel like it is their duty or their job or just their fun to punish those who are going against a pure, natural, and honest way of life. Honesty is really important to the Fae, and if you are someone who is not living honestly, they often find it hilarious to show you a little dishonesty in return, i.e. giving you maggots instead of a baguette. It's a magette instead of a baguette. A maggot! Ooh, I cracked myself up. Okay, so, yes, lots and lots of tales of children and fairy food being both good and bad. You hear about them being both good and bad. When it comes to adults and fairy food, there are a lot of different tales. So there are so many different things that I've heard along my exploration of fairy food lore. One of the things I remember from my teenage years was hearing a story of indigenous fairies to the Americas where they would live their lives very similarly to the people who lived in that area. They were hunters, gatherers, and they would fish and have beautiful, like rows of fish laid out on a stone to dry. They would cut them, open them, and stuff like that, or hang them one along whatever it's called. Fish hanger line, like a clothesline for fish, go off to do something else. Some humans would happen upon it and be like, oh, no one's here, free fish, take the fish, and then be punished in many different ways. One way being they do end up getting home, cleaning, eating the fish, and just like with other instances of fairy food, once they eat this food, they no longer hunger for anything else, and so they continuously try to find that type of food that they had before. In the case of stolen fish, they eat this stolen fairy fish. It's so delicious, and they're always trying to find that exact same type of fish, and they can never find it again. So they end up starving to death because nothing else tastes as good, nothing else tastes as delicious, and nothing satisfies them. Anything else just tastes like literal ash in their mouth. A. B, they steal the fish. By the time they get home, they realize it wasn't fish at all. It was just leaves and crumbles and stones and sticks. Or C, they undergo severe punishment for stealing the fish of a fairy by having their hands cut off, or having all of their foodstuffs or food stores stolen or sullied. Sullied meaning destroyed, molded, jacked up, inedible. There are some other stories which I really, really, really love of people going to a very similar sort of thing as the other one, where it's like a party or like a festival or something that's really exciting happening somewhere where they would not imagine it. A long trek home from the village where you've sold your sheepskins. On the way, you are getting so tired and it's getting very dark outside, you're going to set up camp somewhere, and you see a fairy camp. And it has been glamoured to look like a human camp, so that you can go to this human camp and meet with these people and, find warmth by their fires. They give you something to eat, you eat it, you're theirs. You become a slave to this camp where you then work for them, performing lots of grunt duty, you know, whatever hard thing they need done, you're the one who does it, you know, that kind of thing. Also, in other cases, you eat some of the food, and you disappear from the human realm. Whether it's your soul is there and your body is laying dead in the woods, frozen by the elements, or B, you are a spirited away body and soul. You're now in this other realm where, again, you taste fairy food and you can never be satisfied by any other food ever again. If you're taking body and soul and you taste a piece of fairy food and then you try to go back to the regular world, nothing else will ever satisfy you the way the fairy food does. It will not taste as good, it will not smell as good, it will not sustain you, it won't make you feel like you're taking in any nourishment, and you will waste away and die. That one is probably the scariest thing to me, for sure. Like, eating something that tastes like it's the only food you've ever wanted to eat and the only food you'll ever want to eat again, and then everything else being so disgusting that you can't even stomach it. Like, that is terrifying to me, because yeah, you would just starve to death. And another thing that I really love is the idea that fairy wine puts you under a sort of spell. Especially recently, I read tons and tons of fairy tales. Aside from just, you know, studying fairy lore, I read fantasy nonstop. It's my favorite genre. It's basically the only genre I'm really interested in. So I read a lot about it, and I read a lot of really interesting little tidbits that these authors take from fairy lore and add into their stories just for that authentic little paprika spice, you know. And it's perfect because I think, I forget what I read not last, but what I remember. That's the thing about reading fantasy, is that you mix the stories together all the time. Oh, I'm thinking about A Court of Thorns and Roses, where she drinks the fairy wine and then she just like blacks out and does whatever he asks her to do, just whatever she wants to do. And I'm mixing the story that I read before that, where she ate some, I think it was some sort of berries. Same thing. You lose all inhibitions, you lose complete sense of self, and you can be ordered to do any stupid, ridiculous, self-deprecating acts, and you will just do them happily with a smile on your face, just to please the fairy who is asking you to do them, because they are the most amazing and incredible being you've ever been near, which they will be anyway, and you'd probably just want to please them by doing anything, plucking out your own toenails, like literally anything in the world to make them happy. And it's just such an interesting thing to hear. There have been so many stories like that where they take the concept of fairy wine and they use it in a way that allows the person to drop all of their veneers, any kind of shell that they have around them, any protection they have around themselves, around their heart, anything that they've been keeping themselves from saying or doing, all of that gets washed away, and they just do and say and become their innermost, darkest desires. And they do that, you know, themselves in order to please the fairies, but the fairies just find it hilarious and just so entertaining. And I always think about like what it would be like to be an infinite being and to have just lifetimes and lifetimes and lifetimes to live, and to imagine like how much fun it would be. How much fun it would be just to mess with humans. Like, honestly, as terrible as it would be. I mean, obviously, I would never make anyone do anything horrible. But it would be funny or just like interesting to like challenge a human to do and say and be exactly who they wanted to be without any kind of boundaries, just boundaries dropped. Nothing, you know, that they wanted to say or do would be too much. They would just do it. It would be so interesting to see how a person would live if they were given that kind of freedom, that kind of confidence, and that kind of like cockiness. You know, I would love to see that sort of thing. I always think about like, what kind of fairy I'd be. I'd be a trickster 100%, because I would just want to see how far a person would go, not in a dangerous way, but in a freeing sort of way. Like, what would they do? What would they say? What would they be if there was no consequence? You know what I mean? I lost my train of thought. after that. I don't even know how I got on that. What was I even talking about? But yeah, so the depictions of fairy wine in those types of stories is pretty accurate. In stories where the fairy wine is sweet and honeyed and it sparkles and it glimmers and it has this very enticing and alluring swirly sort of surface, and you just want to put your face in it and drink it. And once you drink it, it's like drinking pure honey and gold and sunshine down your throat, and it makes you feel like you can be and do anything. That is correct. That is the correct depiction of fairy wine, and it does take away hours and hours and hours from you when you won't even recognize it. When you wake up, you will not be in the same place, the same state of being, and you will not remember what you did the night before. All gone. Another really interesting tidbit about fairy food, aside from just don't eat it, is if it is offered to you as a gift in return for doing a service for the fae, then it should be accepted. When I say accepted, I do not mean eaten. You know what I mean? I don't mean eat it. I mean accept it. Because there are, like I said earlier, there are consequences for not accepting a gift from something or someone who is so magical. You know what I mean? It's like someone offering you a blessing and you saying, "Oh, I don't want it." No, thank you. Like, you ungrateful little bloop 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 bloop. If, say, you've done something for a nature spirit, say you have planted some flowers and cleaned up trash from an area that was gross, or you've paid respects to a sacred site, or you've done something that went above and beyond what fairies expect humans to do, and in return you were offered not a gift of a trinket or just some luck or some kind of beautiful something to wear or to keep or to hold or a stone or something like that. You were offered a delicious meal or a food or something like that. Then it is safe to accept it. Now, when it comes to eating that sort of thing, that is up to your discretion. I've heard mostly, I'm going to say like 65, no, okay, I'll say 70-30, 70-30 in favor of eating fairy food that has been gifted to you as a trade for a deed that you have done. In that instance, I would probably eat it. I would probably eat it because it is given in good faith and it is given in return for something. You're not stealing it, you're not finding it, you're not like happening upon it. This is something that is a fair trade for a service done. So that is what I would say is the only safe time to put a fairy food in your face and chew and swallow. That is the only safe time that I would say. Otherwise, as enticing as it may be, oh, and also in the sick Victorian child sense as well, you know, but I don't know. Don't take my word for it. What is that? Is that LaBarbera? Is that what he says? Don't take my word for it. Reading Rainbow. Kaiju is really in need of me right now. So I'm going to cut the video right there. But I hope you enjoyed this little tidbit, this little like snippet into mostly my mind and also into some of the knowledge that I've gathered and some of the ideas that I've gathered from reading about fairy food. Please leave any kind of really interesting facts or bits that you've read about fairy food in the past, about different types of fairy food as well. I definitely plan on doing lots more videos on fairy food. What to offer the fae if you are cooking for them, if you're leaving a place for them, things of that nature, what fairies would have eaten and stuff like that in future videos. But that is it for this one. If you would like to get your own box of these delicious crystal candies, I will leave the links in the description. I do have a coupon code as well, so that will be in there as well. These are so good, they're already gone. Like, I filmed, as soon as I filmed that little tidbit of me like trying it and eating it and being woo-hoo-hoo, I literally showed it to my husband and my son and they ate them all. They always eat them all. They're really, really good. They have such unique flavors. They are gluten-free. They are additive-free. It is a woman-owned, woman-run business. All of the packaging for these items are recyclable. It's biodegradable packaging, and it is just, they're such incredible treats, so please give them a try. And again, have a beautiful, magical, fairy food free day.